Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. There have always been signs that Count Dooku was much more than just Palpatine's Sith apprentice. From a young age, Dooku was already pretty different from the other members of the Jedi Order. For one, he was uniquely aware of his aristocratic birth family and their rejection of him. Dooku was always a very strong-minded individual, one who was exceptionally capable and exhibited both skills and wisdom beyond his years. And so as the Jedi drew closer and closer to the imperfect Republic government, it became harder for individuals like Dooku to serve an order that had been compromised and corrupted by the very dark side they swore to fight. In this way, Dooku's fall to the dark side was a slow and controlled descent, which I think is much more sympathetic and understandable than, say, Anakin's more abrupt collapse defined by unregulated emotions and a poor diet full of too many sweets and high sodium. Now, Dooku's fall not only made sense, I would argue knowing what he did, experiencing what he did, that was his only choice. Not because of any internal moral failings that he had, or greed, or lust for power, but because Dooku was essentially a good Jedi, one who was determined to fight for the needs of the innocent and the forgotten.
None shall defy me, not even you, Master Jedi.
And remember, Dooku was a pretty old Jedi, right? He was basically active when Finis Valorum was in power. By the time Palpatine had risen to the chancellorship, he was already out of the Jedi Order. Valorum was very liberal and pro-Jedi, but ultimately a very well-meaning individual. He was also very easily corrupted. Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious had their hooks in his government. Senator Palpatine was constantly at Valorum's side as his closest advisor on day-to-day issues. And interestingly enough, Palpatine was always convincing Valorum to lean more heavily into the Jedi for non-justice related matters. It was Palpatine who came up with this brilliant idea to close down Jedi outposts in less profitable areas of the galaxy where you're not generating a lot of tax revenue, like in the Outer Rim. Instead, these Jedi were redeployed as essentially mediators for corporate and business disputes. No matter what your opinions are between the dynamic between organized labor and corporations, it's just not a good sign seeing the Jedi appear even in an advisor role on the side of the corporations, which actually happened quite a lot in the late Republic era. And so when Dooku captures Obi-Wan Kenobi while he's snooping around on Geonosis, his little conversation was always quite interesting to audiences who know about his background.
What if I told you that the Republic was now under the control of the Dark Lord of the Sith?
No, that's not possible. The Jedi would be aware of it.
The dark side of the Force has clouded their vision, my friend.
So why is Dooku telling Kenobi this? He even goes as far as to name his master.
Hundreds of senators are now under the influence of a Sith Lord called Darth Sidious.
This could just be a gamble from Dooku. We know that Sith Lords are always looking for an edge against their own masters, and it's clear that Dooku wants Kenobi as an apprentice. Yes, Dooku and Palpatine are both rule of two Sith, but again, these individuals broke the rules all the time. That's basically who the Sith were. They didn't follow rules. And Dooku has some sentimental reasons why he would actually want to teach Kenobi, and Dooku talks about his connection with Obi-Wan's old master, Qui-Gon Jinn, and how he wishes he were still alive and able to help him with the current situation he's facing.
Qui-Gon Jinn would never join you.
Don't be so sure, my young Jedi. You forget that he was once my apprentice, just as you were once his. He knew all about the corruption in the Senate, but he would never have gone along with it if he had learned the truth as I have.
He's not wrong about that. I think Qui-Gon Jinn shares a lot of similarities with both of these men. He had Dooku's strong, independent mind and Obi-Wan Kenobi's incorruptible nature. He was kind of the perfect Jedi, in my opinion. Now, Dooku would go on to be a terribly cruel individual as he plunges the galaxy into war. He committed a lot of war crimes, do things that were just unspeakable. He clearly fell to the dark side, but that doesn't mean he didn't plan on overthrowing Darth Sidious at one point. Even if it were for purely selfish and horrific reasons, I think we still have to entertain the fact that Dooku was ready to move against Palpatine. Today I want to take a look at the specific moments where Dooku actually had a chance to take out Sidious. Could Count Dooku have been the hero or villain the galaxy needed the most? Or was it all just talk? Timing is extremely important here. There are moments in Palpatine's Grand Sith plan where he's very vulnerable, and these are the moments where Dooku should strike. The first moment is actually during the initial days of the Clone Wars. Obi-Wan Kenobi stumbling upon Kamino and then the droid facilities on Geonosis definitely threw a wrench into the Sith's plans. While the Confederacy's highly automated droid army and fleet of militarized freighters was relatively easy to produce thanks to the Separatist Alliance's robust industrial base, the Grand Army of the Republic was the exact opposite. This was a highly specialized military force made up of genetically perfectly engineered clones who were equipped with some of the best military gear in the galaxy. At the Battle of Geonosis, the Grand Army of the Republic was half-baked. It wasn't ready. They had no real starfighters and were relying on a test squadron of V-19s and a bunch of Jedi snub fighters, which were really just built for peacekeeping and not war. The Republic fleet didn't even have real capital ships. The first Venator-class Star Destroyers were still months from completion. All they had were a dozen or so large transport ships, the Acclimator-class assault ship. And here's the thing, the Geonosians just had to wipe out a few of these transports and the battle would have been lost for the Republic. The Acclimators were not heavily shielded or armored. They were very rear echelon type vessels. You typically take these ships into orbits where you have some kind of escort fleet screening it, and you take smaller dropships like the LLAT to the ground. You usually don't expose acclimators to ground fire, which is exactly what the Republican Jedi do during the first battle here. And the Acclimator was not heavily shielded or armored. It was especially vulnerable in atmosphere. If one of their engines are disabled or if the reactor takes a hit while on its landing approach, the Acclimator usually can't recover and will crash into the ground, killing the 16,000 clones on board instantly. But of course, none of the Acclimators were shot down, despite the fact that they had to fly through this heavily contested airspace. And here's the crazy thing, the Republic essentially deployed their entire army at this one battle, 250,000 drones. They deployed them on open ground with very little cover and assaulted the Separatists who were comfortably dug in and heavily fortified. I don't care if you're Pickett, the Light Brigade, or the French and British during the Battle of Somme, charging against prepared enemy positions on foot in a giant frontal assault, that never works. And get this, because the Geonosians were caught off guard, they actually had a massive concentration of droids on this planet. It's estimated in orbit they had anywhere from like 2 to 4 million additional battle droids that were basically ready to be deployed. The clone army was completely outnumbered, like 10 to 1 to 30 to 1, and had there been the will to do so, they would have been completely destroyed by the reserves of battle droids waiting in orbit. But no, somehow the clones won the day. It was a Pyrrhic victory, but they managed to chase the Separatist droid army off the planet. Yes, millions of droids had to flee the few 100,000 fearsome clones sent to take them out. While the trauma in the battlefield was real for the Jedi and the clones, if you take a step back and look at the larger picture, it's clear that the Separatists were trying to do everything in their power not to swallow up this tiny clone army. This battle was as real as Jake Paul's Mike Tyson fight. And in Legends, in the excellent Republic Commando series, after the Battle of Geonosis, clone special forces who had access to the larger campaign map and enemy troop movements were completely confused why Dooku didn't just sweep across the Outer Rim and take out what few Republic garrisons there were, and then head towards Coruscant. There was always a sense that the Separatists were holding back for some unknown reason, and that is why the Republic survived those initial days of the conflict. Now, in our scenario, if Dooku orders his droid army to actually put up a fight against the clones instead of just holding punches, I think they would destroy half of the clone army before it even reaches the ground. I mean, those acclimators would have taken heavy losses. The clones and the inexperienced Jedi leaders would get bogged down in the open. They would try to maybe wagon up with some of their vehicles, but eventually Seppi reinforcements will arrive from all directions, and just like how the Jedi get surrendered at Petronaki, the clone forces will be forced to stand down and surrender. Actually, if you take a look at the second battle of Geonosis, that's basically what happens. The defeat of the clone army would send shockwaves through the galaxy. Most people were waking up on Coruscant without the knowledge that the Republic even had a standing army, and so it's kind of wild that that standing army would be wiped out so quickly. Dooku's forces would charge quickly towards the core. They would probably avoid most of the larger garrisons and fortresses on the way and besiege Coruscant. Dooku would issue an ultimatum for the Republic to give up. I wouldn't even be surprised if Dooku publicly announces that Palpatine is a Sith Lord and releases a treasure trove of information and proof to support this fact. I think with all these cards in his hands, Dooku could possibly prevent the Clone Wars from even starting. But of course, he could very well also put himself in charge as dictator afterwards, replacing Palpatine with another crazy Sith. So let's say Dooku goes along with Palpatine's initial plan for one reason or another, but later on during the middle of the war, somewhere along that time, he starts plotting against Palpatine and decides to try to take him out. I think the second window of opportunity for Dooku is actually during the Battle of Coruscant. Now, this is a much trickier situation because by this time the Republic has significantly ramped up their military production, and the Separatist heartland was under siege with much of their industrial capacity either destroyed or under threat. The Separatists at this point was basically Germany right before losing the Battle of Stalingrad. They had reached their full potential and now were about to face their rapid decline. But the Separatists had one more ace up their sleeve, one large reserve force ready for a devastating counterattack into the heart of the Republic space via a secret hyperspace lane. This was the Battle of Coruscant. This is basically the Separatist version of the Ardennes counteroffensive or Battle of the Bulge. This was Germany's last attempt to push the Allies back. A massive fleet over Coruscant had one purpose. It was designed to reshore support for Palpatine and his war. The citizens of the Republic sensed something was changing with the conflict and that perhaps the end was near, and members of the Jedi Order and the Senate were beginning to question whether Palpatine would give up his emergency wartime powers. There's actually Senate subcommittees now investigating how the war is being funded, and yeah, more and more people were thinking less about the Separatist threat and more about the deficit that the Republic had built up over the last 4 years. When the Battle of Coruscant happened, many of the Republic's most powerful business leaders, politicians, and celebrities were present. These were individuals powerful enough to live on the surface of the planet, and that is also the part of the planet that received the most damage. You just had debris and giant capital ships falling out of the sky. It would have been very terrifying. This very visual and devastating attack gives Palpatine all the support he needs to continue the war and military spending. But in the middle of Battle of Coruscant, General Grievous carries a daring raid on the Senate district. His goal is to capture Palpatine. Grievous's forces are successful and they extract him from the planet onto Count Dooku's flagship, the Invisible Hand. Realistically, the Separatists didn't have enough firepower and droids to actually hold Coruscant, and so securing the Chancellor was actually a terrific strategy. It might have been their only move here. But instead of leaving with their prize once they gathered it, they kind of stay on station and allow Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi to board the Invisible Hand. This was orchestrated, of course. Dooku, Grievous, and Sidious wanted Anakin to have a special fall to the dark side moment, which all things considered is kind of nice and thoughtful for the Sith. Of course, Dooku didn't know that his head would roll at the end of this, but that's the Sith for you, great at keeping secrets and throwing surprise parties. But what if Dooku flipped the script? What if he realized what was happening? I think he wasn't a dumb individual, right? What if he saw the writing on the wall and realized as the war got closer to ending, eventually he would be placed on the chopping block? Someone needs to be a scapegoat for this conflict. And why does Palpatine need an apprentice who's literally older than him, especially now that he seems fascinated with this younger and much more powerful Jedi Anakin? And so in this case, Dooku would probably disappear with Chancellor Palpatine. This leads to the Republic probably appointing a caretaker government led by someone like Mas Amedda before a special election is held. And of course, the key issue for this election will be, what that candidate says about the war, whether they want to end it or if they want to spend more money funding the Grand Army of the Republic. If Dooku was smart, which he is, he would probably try to reach some type of ceasefire deal with the Republic and these candidates. He'd probably try to give the anti-war faction as much ammunition as possible so that the next Chancellor is more open to diplomacy. Of course, that also means not killing Palpatine right away, because that would be seen as a hostile act. But with Palpatine in his custody, Dooku could control the narrative over Palpatine. He could try to expose Palpatine for being a Sith. He could point towards the conspiracy that he was heavily involved in. In many ways, he was the prime witness here for destroying Palpatine. Remember, it was Darth Tyrannus who first commissioned the clone army. The Kaminoans can confirm this. It was Dooku who helped create the Separatist Alliance with the help of Sidious. Dooku could probably reveal information about Palpatine leading all the way back to the Battle of Naboo. This would severely damage Palpatine's standing in the galaxy and make him into a villain. The sheer amount of proof would be devastating. I think the Judicial Department and the Senate would have a field day at trying to understand what exactly Palpatine has been doing for the last 10 years. Better yet, imagine if Dooku then brings Palpatine back to the Republic and allows the Jedi to imprison Palpatine as a sign of goodwill. This would turn Dooku from a villain to a much more complex head of state who falls much more in line with the populist leader he kind of created, or that image he created for himself. If Dooku truly wanted to bring peace and stability to the galaxy, he could help end the conflict and return the Separatist worlds to the Republic, albeit with some serious new legislation designed to give the Outer Rim worlds much more political power and support. Now, Dooku could also maintain the Confederacy of Independent Systems and continue to rule the faction. A short-term ceasefire can lead to an actual peace and eventual normalization of relations. While I understand the appeal for a galaxy-wide government, for the sake of unity, sometimes having smaller, more localized governments in charge can really help serve the needs of the constituents better than some large, bloated government structure, which is what the Republic was. We're talking about, galactic rights versus planetary rights, states' rights, stuff like that. But yeah, Dooku is an exceptionally complicated character. He's definitely not your run-of-the-mill Sith, and I think that is why audiences love him so much. I think at one point he legitimately wanted to make the galaxy a better place and at least eliminate the rampant corruption he saw everywhere. But again, power corrupts. Even extremely disciplined and powerful individuals like Count Dooku, maybe at one point he just became the very evil he wanted to fight. And that is because governance is never easy. Working with people, sharing power is never easy. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.